Somewhere in the human psyche, there is a hidden chamber that only betrayal can unlock. Not the small betrayals of gossip, envy, or social cruelty, but the kind that tears through your inner world and leaves your identity shaking. The lover you trusted, the friend you defended, the version of yourself you believed was finally safe. When that blade turns, something deeper than emotion begins to move. The old alchemists called this descent the nigredo, the blackening, the moment when the false structure starts to decay so something more honest can appear. This is why betrayal feels almost sacred in its violence. It does not only wound the heart, it strips illusion from the soul. But here is the darker question. What if the betrayer is not only outside you? What if every outer traitor awakens an inner one? A hidden force that has already been trading your wholeness for comfort, approval, fantasy, and the narcotic of denial. Tonight, we enter that chamber, not to excuse pain, but to discover the gold buried beneath it. There is an old story, preserved only in fragments, about a late antique scribe from the port city of Massalia. His name was Leontius, and he was known for copying Hermetic texts by candlelight in a room that smelled of ash, salt, and wine. For years he trained a younger student, a quiet boy named Dorian, whose hands were steady and whose questions seemed sincere. Leontius taught him how to grind mineral pigments, how to seal a vessel without cracking it, how to whisper a prayer before beginning any serious work. But one winter morning, Dorian disappeared. Along with him went a chest of silver, several copied pages, and a private notebook Leontius never intended anyone to read. The city called it theft. Leontius called it exposure. Because what truly shattered him was not the loss of money. It was the humiliation of realizing how much of his wisdom depended on being admired. Betrayal had not only revealed the student, it had revealed the hidden bargain inside the master. This is where the real operation begins. Not revenge, not moral outrage, not the ego building a throne from its own injury. The first work of betrayal is extraction. What in you was bribed into blindness? What did you keep refusing to see because the fantasy was warmer than the truth? In alchemy, the work always begins with the impure substance, the prima materia, the foul, embarrassing, unwanted material that no one wishes to claim. Betrayal drags that material into daylight. Suddenly, you are face to face with your hunger for reassurance, your fear of being abandoned, your addiction to the image of being chosen. And this is why the wound becomes initiatory. It does not merely accuse another person. It forces a confession from you. Somewhere, before they betrayed your trust, you may have betrayed your own perception. You silenced intuition. You decorated denial. You called self-abandonment loyalty. The outer Judas enters only after the inner contract has already been signed. In depth psychology, this is the moment when the shadow begins to constellate. Jung understood that painful encounters do not simply show us what others are. They reveal what we have exiled from ourselves. Betrayal does not only break trust, it tears open the psychic arrangement that allowed us to remain divided. The loyal mask cracks, and beneath it, we discover a more uncomfortable truth. Perhaps we needed the illusion. Perhaps we preferred admiration to honesty, attachment to discernment, hope to clear perception. In archetypal terms, Judas is not only a historical figure or a villain in sacred drama. Judas is a function within the soul. It is the force that destroys false unity, so a more difficult wholeness can emerge. The psyche uses this function without sentimentality. If you refuse to leave an old pattern consciously, life may send a rupture to break it for you. And when that happens, the wound is no longer only personal. It becomes initiatory, almost liturgical, a dark rite of awakening. There is a Sufi tale, seldom written and mostly passed in whispers, about a wandering mystic named Farid, who kept a lantern burning outside his door each night. The villagers believed it was an act of hospitality. His students believed it was a symbol of devotion. But the lamp served another purpose. Farid feared the darkness within his own house. One evening, a traveler arrived with gentle speech, lowered eyes, and the patience of someone who knew how to become trusted. Farid welcomed him. For weeks the guest helped with chores, listened to teachings, and praised his wisdom. Then one dawn he vanished, taking with him a leather satchel filled with hymns, prayers, and private reflections gathered over decades. Farid ran through the market in fury. But when he returned home exhausted, he noticed the lantern had gone out. In the darkness, for the first time, he saw a long crack in the wall where vermin had been nesting for years. The theft had not created the decay. It had only exposed what the light had helped him ignore. This is the psychology of betrayal in its cruelest clarity. The betrayer does not always place darkness inside you. More often, he extinguishes the lamp that kept you from seeing what was already there. This is why the wound feels so total. You do not only lose a person, you lose the story that made your world feel coherent. Jung warned that what remains unconscious does not disappear. It returns as fate. Betrayal is one of fate's sharpest instruments because it pierces the ego's favorite illusion. If I love correctly, choose carefully, and stay loyal enough, I will be safe. But the psyche is not built on contracts. It is built on transformation. In the black stage of alchemy, everything polished is dragged into the soil to see whether it has roots. Was your kindness real, or was it a strategy to avoid abandonment? Was your generosity love, or a subtle bribe to be needed? Was your trust openness, or denial dressed in sacred language? Betrayal asks these questions without mercy. At this point, the inner Judas appears, not as a monster, but as a mirror. It asks questions the wounded ego hates. Where did you abandon your own instincts? Where did you ignore the red flag because loneliness felt more frightening than truth? Where did you keep the story alive by betraying your own boundaries? This is why the ancient Hermetic writers spoke of the vessel. In alchemy, the vessel was the sealed space where volatile elements could burn without destroying the whole laboratory. Psychologically, the vessel is your capacity to stay with the experience without turning it into chaos. Betrayal tempts you toward two false solutions. The first is vengeance, which keeps your soul chained to the one who hurt you. The second is premature forgiveness, which often hides a fear of your own anger. Both are evasions. The deeper work is containment. Let grief speak. Let rage speak. Let humiliation speak. Not so they can rule you, but so they can reveal what they are guarding beneath the wound. Most people miss the occult logic hidden here. The strongest reaction often guards the deepest treasure. The shadow does not hide your gold in beautiful places. It buries it in poison, shame, obsession, and grief. So the ego recoils before it can reclaim what was lost. If betrayal leaves you obsessed, it may be protecting your stolen power. If it leaves you ashamed, it may be guarding a forgotten self-respect that was traded away long before the wound arrived. If it leaves you in despair, it may be pointing toward a life you were meant to live but kept postponing. This is why the old philosophers insisted that poison must be distilled, not discarded. The venom carries information. The inner Judas is not only the force that betrays you, it is also the force that refuses to let illusion survive forever. It breaks the false temple so you can finally see which part of your devotion was love and which part was hunger wearing sacred robes. Now we enter the most dangerous corridor of all, projection. At first, the betrayer appears as pure darkness, a single stain, a living emblem of evil. The ego prefers this simplicity because it preserves innocence. If they are entirely corrupt, then you never have to ask what psychic energy they were carrying for you. But Jung understood that projection is the soul's way of placing its own exiled material onto another face. Their actions are theirs. Their deception belongs to them. But the archetype they awaken in you may belong partly to your own unlived life. Perhaps they embody the selfishness you were never allowed to claim, the power to choose yourself without apology. Perhaps they carry the cunning you denied in order to remain morally pure. Perhaps they dramatize the forbidden independence you secretly needed. This does not excuse betrayal. It radicalizes its meaning, because now the wound becomes a summons. Reclaim what you abandoned, separate truth from fantasy, and take back the energy you left trapped inside the one who broke you. The alchemists called the next movement separatio, the sacred act of separating one element from another so confusion can no longer masquerade as truth. This is where the spell begins to break. You divide fact from fantasy, event from interpretation, their deception from your lesson. What actually happened? What did you imagine was happening? What did you keep ignoring because it threatened the identity you were invested in preserving? There is an old tale about a philosopher named Severin who wore a bronze seal around his neck and claimed it carried the blessing of wisdom. Students gathered around him, not only for his teachings, but for the aura of certainty the seal seemed to give him. One evening, before a public debate, he reached for it and found only an empty cord. It had been taken by the disciple who praised him most. Later the disciple confessed, "I stole it because you trusted the symbol more than the truth it was meant to serve." Betrayal does this. It removes the talisman. And without the charm, you are forced to discover whether your strength was ever truly yours. After betrayal, attention becomes enchanted. Your mind circles the wound like a priest trapped in a ruined temple. You check, replay, rehearse, imagine, return. You revisit the last message, the final look, the sentence that now seems loaded with hidden meaning. In occult language, this is a binding of life force. Your attention has been captured, and whatever captures attention begins to shape destiny. This is why the next operation is not emotional drama, but the withdrawal of psychic energy. Jung would call it the reclaiming of libido from an object that has become overcharged with meaning. You do not achieve this through slogans or forced positivity. You do it through discipline. Name the hook. Is it rage? Shame? Longing? The fantasy of reversal? Then name the payoff. What identity do you preserve by remaining bound to the wound? Victim, martyr, abandoned one, misunderstood saint. Betrayal keeps its spell only as long as your future continues feeding the altar of your past. This is where the blackness begins to clear, and the next alchemical phase appears. Albedo, the whitening. Not happiness, not forgetting. Not pretending the wound was for the best. Albedo is colder than that. It is the clean light that appears after decomposition has finished its work. In this phase, you begin to see with painful accuracy. I was loyal to an image, not a reality. I was attached to potential, not truth. I confused intensity with intimacy. I called familiarity fate. This is where the inner Judas reveals a paradoxical mercy. It does not destroy illusion because it hates you. It destroys illusion because some deeper part of the psyche refuses to let you remain divided forever. But albedo demands humility. You must ask where you participated, not to blame yourself, but to recover agency. Because if all power stays with the betrayer, you remain spiritually bankrupt. Clarity begins the moment you stop begging for a different past and start building a different inner structure. Then comes a more intimate grief, and for many people, this is the hardest chamber to enter. It is no longer only they betrayed me. It becomes I betrayed myself by staying where my spirit was already shrinking. This is the deeper wound. Not just the treachery of another, but the slow self-abandonment that prepared the altar for it. Depth psychology recognizes this pattern well. We cling to familiar suffering because it gives the ego a role to perform. The loyal one, the fixer, the patient one, the one who endures. Betrayal destroys that costume. And once the costume falls, a terrifying question emerges from underneath it. Who am I when I stop performing my wounds? This is the real dark night. Not simply rejection, but the collapse of an identity built on being needed, chosen, or approved. In this phase, the work is quiet. No spectacle. No spiritual theater. Only honest mourning, clean inventory, and the sacred discipline of letting the false self die without trying to resurrect it as a new persona. After this mourning, the work begins to change form. In Hermetic symbolism, the next movement is conjunctio, the union of opposites, the inner marriage. Betrayal splits the psyche at first. One part wants to harden into suspicion and never trust again. Another part still longs for tenderness, devotion, and human warmth. If you obey only one side, you become divided in a new way, either naive again or permanently bitter. But initiation demands a third path. You learn to hold softness and discernment together. You can love, but you also verify. You can forgive, but you do not return to the same altar. You can feel compassion without abandoning your boundaries. Jung called this the transcendent function, a new stance born from tension, not escape. And when this happens, something remarkable occurs. The betrayer shrinks back to human size. They are no longer the center of your myth. They become what they always were. A painful instrument in a larger transformation, one that returns you to yourself. And this brings us to rubedo, the reddening, the phase where insight becomes embodiment. Because a revelation that does not change your habits is only aesthetic philosophy. The inner Judas rarely returns as a dramatic catastrophe. Most often, it appears as a small daily bargain. One more message to the person who already showed you who they are. One more compromise against your own intuition. One more distraction to avoid the silence where truth is waiting. 30 coins, again and again, in modern form. So the final lesson of betrayal is practical. Name the temptation the moment it appears. Delay it. Witness it. Redirect the energy into form, prayer, journaling, movement, solitude, disciplined work, honest speech. This is daily alchemy. Then the wound changes meaning. It is no longer proof that you are cursed, foolish, or unlovable. It becomes initiation. Betrayal showed you where you were divided, where you traded truth for belonging. And when that division is healed, the philosopher's stone is no longer fantasy. It becomes integrity. This script structure is strong. The next best step is for me to turn all 15 sections into a fully polished final YouTube narration draft with smoother transitions and a stronger ending hook for retention.